What lies beneath? China sends more aircraft into Taiwan's air defense zone as a new threat looms on the sea. Chaotic and dysfunctional. A UK whistleblower slams the British government's evacuation of Afghanistan. Great leap backwards. Reporters Without Borders says press freedom is in free fall in Hong Kong. Domino effect. Australia joins the US in boycotting the Winter Olympics. A warm welcome to TaiwanPlus News. I'm Yin Khvat. China carried out 9 incursions into Taiwan's air defense zone on Tuesday, the highest number in one day this month. With the increase of US defense spending in the region, Beijing is also flexing its military muscle at sea. There are plans for 3 new amphibious assault ships that also act as mini aircraft carriers. As Bing Wang reports, there are now concerns the vessels could be stationed near Taiwan.
The People's Liberation Army on Tuesday sent 9 more aircraft into Taiwan's air defense zone. And while the incursions continue in the skies, a new threat looms down below. China recently commissioned 3 Type 75 amphibious assault ships. Military experts say the ships pose a threat to Taiwan's naval security.
应该会有2艘在南部战区，那最近要成军的这一艘应该是在东部战区，针对的台湾是它首要的重点哦。
The 40,000-ton Type 75 amphibious assault ship also functions as a mini carrier, with space for 6 helicopters, tanks, armored vehicles, and up to 1,000 troops. China's Global Times said the Type 75 is a deterrent to what it calls Taiwan secessionists. Meanwhile, the U.S. is poised to pass its 2022 National Defense Authorization Act, which contains almost $770 billion in military spending. $7.1 billion of this is earmarked for the Pacific Deterrence Initiative. This may bolster the U.S. posture in the region, which Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin sees as worrying thanks to China's increasing strength.
It's racing to develop military capability as fast as it can, but some of the coercive activity we see in the region has us and our partners in the region very, very concerned.
The more than 3,000-page act mentions Taiwan a record 73 times.
We remain steadfast to our One China policy and our commitments under the Taiwan Relations Act to support Taiwan's ability to defend itself while also maintaining our capacity to resist any resort to force that would jeopardize the security of the people of Taiwan.
But some local experts say a military invasion from China is unlikely due to the difficulty of invading the island.
台湾就诚如很多人讲的，其实我们是个刺猬岛，都还没有办法压制的情况之下，就要进行登陆作战的话，事实上来讲，不太可能，无异于飞蛾扑火。
But with cross-strait tensions continuing on the rise, Taiwan knows it must prepare for any scenario, even something as extreme as a suicide mission. Alex Chen and Bing Wang for TaiwanPlus.
Consumer prices in Taiwan rose 2.84% in November compared with the same time last year. It's the biggest year-on-year increase in nearly 9 years. Nearly every category saw a spike, including transportation, dining, entertainment and living costs. The government says the increase is due to surging prices of fuel and food and denies a wider inflation trend is underway. It predicts prices will stabilise this month thanks to subsidies and tax reductions. A former employee of Britain's Foreign Office made damning accusations about the country's efforts to evacuate desperate Afghans from Kabul as the Taliban reclaimed power in August this year. The claims include unanswered pleas for assistance, prioritising the lives of animals, and a dire lack of expert knowledge. James Chater has the details.
Chaotic, dysfunctional. Those were the words of a 25-year-old whistleblower used to describe the British government's evacuation of vulnerable Afghans when Kabul fell to the Taliban in late August. The former civil servant made the damning accusations in written evidence to the British Parliament. They include that only 5% of people who requested assistance received it, and that thousands of desperate emailed requests for help went unanswered.
Hesitate to describe it in these terms, but as a known unknown. We did not know how many people would come forward on the day for evacuation, if that's what it came to, because we did not know how many British passport holders were in Afghanistan on any one day.
The evidence questioned why staffers with no knowledge of Afghanistan made decisions determining the fate of people's lives, and highlighted that some of those left behind have since been murdered by the Taliban for their associations with the British military. On top of that, as people feared for their lives while the Taliban swept through Afghanistan, a top British Foreign Office official involved in the evacuations continued his holiday for another 11 days after Kabul fell.
I've reflected on that, and if I had my time again, I would have come back from my leave earlier.
The Taliban took control of Kabul as the United States was completing its pullout from Afghanistan in late August. In that time, the UK airlifted around 15,000 people from the country, including 5,000 British and 8,000 Afghan nationals. But perhaps most shocking of all, the whistleblower's evidence contains allegations that a charter flight evacuated 170 cats and dogs, but no people.
We took the decision then to evacuate animals over people.
There was no decision to evacuate animals over people.
How then did animals evacuate before some people?
So I'm not sure that's right in terms of timing. Nigel wanted to come in, but there was a charter flight arranged for animals. We helped enable that.
British Prime Minister Boris Johnson refuted claims that animals were prioritised over humans.
No, that's complete nonsense, but what I can tell you is that I think that the operation of pitting to airlift 15,000 people out of Kabul in the way that we did over the summer was one of the outstanding military achievements of the last 50 years or more.
Words that ring hollow for the thousands whose emails went unanswered, still searching for a way out of Afghanistan. Karma Shu and James Chater for TaiwanPlus.
US President Joe Biden has told his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin that the West would respond with strong economic and other measures if Russia invades Ukraine. The two leaders had a 2-hour virtual call on Tuesday amid a buildup of tens of thousands of Russian troops near Ukraine's border. The Kremlin has denied it intends to attack its neighbor and said its troop posture is defensive. Putin said he wants to guarantee that NATO won't expand to include Ukraine. Australia will not send diplomatic representation to the Winter Olympics in Beijing, following a similar move by the United States. Prime Minister Scott Morrison said the boycott should come as no surprise. He cited China's human rights abuses in Xinjiang and ongoing trade tensions as reasons for the move. Morrison said that Australian athletes will still attend the Games, which are due to begin in February.
But of course, the human rights abuses in Xinjiang and the many other issues that Australia has consistently raised. We have been very pleased and very happy to talk to the Chinese government about these issues, and there's been no obstacle to that occurring on our side. But the Chinese government has consistently not accepted those opportunities for us to meet about these issues. So it is not surprising, therefore, that Australian government officials would therefore not be going to China for those games.
International media watchdog Reporters Without Borders says press freedom is in free fall in Hong Kong in a report published Tuesday called The Great Leap Backwards of Journalism in China. Our reporter Louise Watt spoke to Cedric Alviani, the director of the organization's East Asia Bureau in Taipei. I started by asking him how much the situation in Hong Kong has deteriorated.
Over the past 18 months, there have been a systematic and very violent suppression of freedom of the press. 18 months ago, the Chinese regime has adopted the national security law that allows the Hong Kong government to bypass the constitution, to bypass the basic law, and to engage in arbitrary detention and to accuse journalists on national security crimes that are actually defined in such a blurry manner that any crime can apply to any kind of journalism. For the first time in the recent history of Hong Kong, there are journalists and press freedom defenders detained in Hong Kong. We have 10 currently, and only 12 persons are being accused of national security crimes, including Jimmy Lai, the founder of Apple Daily, a media that was recently dismantled by the Hong Kong government. Jimmy Lai is actually today 74 years old, and he is spending his birthday in prison.
How is the Chinese government increasingly trying to control information outside its borders?
The attitude of the Chinese ambassadors is very emblematic. They systematically attack every journalist or political commentator whose opinion is different from what they would like to see. Our report is illustrated on the cover by the work of a very famous Chinese dissident artist named Badiou Cao. And this artist actually had last month an exhibition in a small Italian town, Brescia, and the city government of this town received actually a lot of pressure from the Chinese embassy for this exhibition to be cancelled. And it is not acceptable that a cartoonist would receive so much pressure for a small exhibition. This is something happening everywhere in the world. Everywhere the Chinese ambassadors are applying pressure on journalists.
Coming up after the break, we give you a taste of how a new generation of Indigenous Taiwanese chefs are preserving their culture through cuisine.
Thanks for watching TaiwanPlus. Follow today's top stories from Taiwan and around the world by downloading the TaiwanPlus app.
台湾最有人情味的地方。
Welcome back. You're watching TaiwanPlus News. A reminder of our top story. While the US is increasing defense spending in the region, Beijing is also flexing its military muscle at sea with plans for more amphibious assault ships. 11 unarmed people have been captured and killed by junta forces in northwestern Myanmar, according to local media. Footage shows a pile of burnt bodies. Reportedly among them are teenagers and a paraplegic man. Residents said most of the victims were members of an anti-junta guerrilla group. It is the latest in a series of atrocities linked to Myanmar's junta since they carried out a coup earlier this year. The country's military has a long record of committing human rights abuses against its citizens, including a campaign of torture, rape and extrajudicial killings against the minority Muslim Rohingya population.
These systematic post-coup abuses are very much like those inflicted on the Rohingya, and make no mistake, they amount to crimes against humanity. This junta has been carrying out these abuses against the pro-democracy movement pretty much with the same callous disregard for life that it's had with its long campaign of its scorched earth policies that it inflicts on ethnic minorities in other parts of the country.
Rohingya refugees in the UK and US are suing Facebook for allowing hate speech against ethnic Muslim minority to proliferate online in Myanmar. The lawsuit against the social media giant seeks over $150 billion in compensation. It claims the company failed to remove posts in the local Burmese language inciting violence against the Rohingya. The case against Facebook, whose parent company is now known as Meta, was simultaneously filed at courts in San Francisco and London. Human rights groups estimate that around 10,000 Rohingya Muslims were killed during a military crackdown in Myanmar in 2017. More than 800,000 Rohingya now live in refugee camps in Bangladesh. The pandemic and lockdowns have affected lives and businesses across the world. One of the biggest victims was bookstores, which already were under threat due to digitization. But a Ghanaian photographer living in New York used it as an opportunity to build the world's largest collection of books with images taken in Africa or by photographers of African descent. Philip Brassard has this story.
It was magazines like National Geographic that sparked Ninson's love for photography. And the more he looked at them, the more questions he had about the stories they told.
Some of these pictures tell stories of places, but mostly sometimes what I wonder is, what if those people in those communities contribute to these stories in a way of self-expression of who they are? Do people in these communities accept how they are being depicted, especially the Africans?
Ninson's idea is to create Africa's largest photography library in the Ghanaian capital of Accra. The library will be called the Dekine Center. Dekine means take the lead in Ninson's local language. And that's what Ninson hopes Africans will do. Take the lead in telling their own narratives.
Because we've left the space for so long for people to tell their stories and distribute their stories. And that is what I want to be able to fill that, give the tools and the resources to African photographers and to Black people to be able to tell our stories.
Ninson originally took out personal loans to pay for the books, but after getting a helping hand from the founder of the popular blog Humans of New York, a crowdfunding campaign raised $1 million in just one day.
In the beginning, when I was collecting these books and I was spending my own money, working under a lot of work, several hours to pay for this, was because I come from Ghana. I don't come from a rich home. And to have the opportunity to come here, the whole notion is like to make it for yourself.
Ninson has already sent more than 18,000 books back to Ghana. And he will return home himself in December while the Dekine Center is being built. If all goes well, by the end of next year, Paul Ninson's Ghanaian dream will become a reality. Patrick Chun and Philip Brassard for TaiwanPlus.
Grilled ribs served with a secret sweet sauce, pumpkins, cakes sprinkled with popped Taiwan oil millet. These are just some of the innovative dishes created by a new generation of indigenous chefs in the southeastern county of Taidong. By fusing traditional cuisine with modern methods, they're serving up their flavors to a wider audience than ever before. Wei Zhonglu has the story.
Ibu is preparing an indigenous gourmet treat for her customers. She's a Bunong cook, and this millet dish is one of the most famous on her menu. She stirs it for 2 hours so it reaches the right consistency. Ibu spent a year learning how to make this dish from a tribal elder. Since then, she's become the tribe's millet specialist.
老人家在我的脸上都是看到小米，就是刻着你就是专门要煮小米的人，所以老人家就会讲述更多他们以前有吃过的传统的料理。经过了这一次之后，我就觉得传统的味道，尤其是那遗失的料理，是一件很值得再把它重新做回来的事情。
Ibu also takes great care to serve the food in a traditional manner, on leaves and bamboo. The millet grows right next to her restaurant, which only adds to the dining experience. This is her way of telling the story of her people and their culture.
我爸爸常说，如果说没有小米的话，就不会有布农族的祭典，因为我们的所有的祭典都是因为小米而办。在什么季节该种什么植物，然后什么像是玉米啊、甘蔗啊，还有一些地瓜，都是随着小米而种植的，所以那些菜色就会出现在我们的风味餐里面。当我们在诉说这个料理的时候，可以让游客能够更知道说他为什么要吃这一道菜。
Fayang, another indigenous cook, also gets many of her ingredients from her own restaurant's backyard.
其实野菜呢，对我们阿美族来说是非常常见的，因为它就长在生活周边。所以其实客人来到我这里做体验的时候，就是会带他们到小野菜园，先认识野菜。其实有很多部分都是每一个菜都是跟那个我们自己的文化有做连结。
After living in a big city for years, Fayang returned home to her family. And she says this restaurant is a new opportunity to reconnect to her roots.
应该说我们池上的我们这个部落，就是它跟汉人比较接近，对，所以我会觉得小时候就会觉得，好像就只有丰年祭的时候才会接触到文化，像平常日常就比较少。
Most indigenous food in Taiwan is geared to tourists and has been adapted to cater to the taste of the Taiwanese majority. But there are more people like Ibu and Fayang who want to share the genuine spirit of indigenous culture, and the Taidong city government wants to help them.
有一群年轻人想回家，然后他们也很想把自己的文化，自己想要让外地人了解的那一个部分，用食物来做呈现。可是，在这样子，大家是在一个单打独斗的状态。那我们这个计划可以给的帮助，就是在餐食的服务上面的一些建议，还有整个空间的一个调整改造。
To make the most authentic indigenous cuisine, these restaurants use a lot of traditional crops, which then encourages tribes to keep growing them and gain their food sovereignty.
当它夯起来的时候，它是不是就开始会有一个量，就会产生了一个需求，需求就会反映到种植的面积或是采植的那个分量。
Du He, an indigenous writer, visited all the restaurants that work with the city project. She said that by presenting traditional food in a modern way, these restaurants plant a seed of curiosity about their culture.
It's still very original and still very natural. And I would say that's how I see indigenous food. It's not just food to feed people. And it's more about like the story behind it and also like a lot of wisdom behind it.
Taiwanese indigenous people have struggled for decades to regain power over their cultural discourse. Now the younger generation is being creative about merging tradition with modernity by using food as a way to preserve their stories while building a connection with those around them. Asnaya Zhou, Weizhong Liu for TaiwanPlus.
Self-replicating biological robots sound like the start of a sci-fi movie, but scientists in the United States have successfully made the first ones. The tiny xenobots are about the size of poppy seeds and were designed by artificial intelligence using frog cells. The scientific team discovered that the Pac-Man-like bots are capable of finding and gathering cells into piles that gradually meld into new round xenobots. The xenobots could be used in medical applications in the future. Thanks for watching TaiwanPlus News. I'm Yin Khvat. We leave you with images of Santa Claus and elves visiting an aquarium in Malta to spread Christmas joy underwater. For more stories from Taiwan and around the world, please download the TaiwanPlus app. Stay safe and see you next time.